My name is Michael Stooksbury. I am 18 years old. Today's date is... What is today's date?
November the 26th, 2015.
November the 26th, 2015. And I am speaking with Barbra Rayburn, who is sort of my adopted grandmother. And we are recording in a car heading from Harriman, Tennessee to Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Okay, so Barbara, tell me about where you grew up and what your childhood was like.
I was born in Roane County, Tennessee, and lived there with my parents and my brothers and sisters until I was 11. Went to school in South Harriman, and then I went to school at Emory Heights. And when I was 11, we moved to Hopewell, which was a little community about 9 miles from Cleveland, Tennessee. And there I went to school at Hopewell till I was through 8th grade. Then I went on over and finished at Bradley Central High School, which we lived in the country. We always had a garden. My mother was just a housewife. She raised a garden. She canned, in the summer, she canned everything she could find to feed. There was 8 children, and she raised 2 sisters and helped raise a brother. So there was always a need for plenty of food. So she canned, and she always cooked. She was a very good cook. My father was a farmer and a laborer, and he farmed. He had a regular job, and in the evenings and Saturdays he did farm work. And we went to church. We walked to church. We lived close to a Baptist church, and we went to a Baptist church. And all the time I was growing up, from the time I was big enough to walk, we'd go to church, and we'd go to the nearest church that was to our house because we had to walk to the services, but we never missed a service. We went for anything. We was having a revival or a funeral or music school. It didn't matter. If they was having something at church, we went. And then with school, it was sort of the same way. Anything they had extra at school, if it was a ball game or pie supper or whatever, we were there. Because now this was before television. There wasn't much to do except what you did at church and in school. But in 1954, my oldest brother got a part-time job in the summer, saved up his money, and bought us a television. Of course, it was black and white, but we were thrilled to death to have a television. And it just got 3 channels. It's out of Chattanooga. And after we had it a little while, we bought this piece of paper. It was a cellophane, actually. It was 3 colors. The bottom of it was green, the middle of it was kind of a flesh color, and the top was blue. We glued it on front of our television so it looked like we had color television. Of course, it didn't fool nobody, but we used it for a while until the tape come loose and got tired of fooling with it. But we really enjoyed life, even though we didn't. And we was always really poor, but we didn't know it. We just had as much as anybody else that lived around there. And we didn't know we was poor, but we were. We wore hand-me-down clothes. And, of course, like I say, my mother canned a lot of stuff in the summer, so we'd have plenty of food. And my daddy worked at the farm and his job, and my brothers, they picked up odd jobs after school on weekends when they could find it. But it was a good life. I enjoyed it. And then when I was 8, when I got through school, I was 17 and got through high school. And I couldn't find a good job till I was 18. So I moved back to Harriman and to live with my aunt so I could babysit her daughter while she worked. And I did that till a while, and then I got a job in town. And first job was at Draper and Darwin as a clothing store. And I had difficulty getting to work because I lived 2 miles out of town and didn't have a car. So I had this friend that was working for the dentist, and me and her decided to get us an apartment together, live in town. So we did that. And that worked out well. We lived from the time we were 18 till we were 21. And she got a car finally. She got a better job, and she could afford a car, so she got a car. And we enjoyed those 3 years. We had a lot of fun. But then, first she decided to get married, and then after she decided to get married, I couldn't afford to live by myself. And I've been talking about getting married for a while to Bill. We talked about it. We had never decided for sure. But when Norma and Jerry got married, we decided, well, since I couldn't stay in Harriman on what I made, couldn't pay the rent and everything by myself, we decided we'd go ahead and get married.
All right, I'm going to stop you right there so we can go on the next question, because this is going to come up in later questions.
Okay.
But next question. When you were growing up, what role did religion play in your life?
Religion was very important. It was our social life was religion. We went to everything they had at church. I mean, if it was a church service, a regular church service, or if it was baptizing or anything that they had in the church, everybody in the community went. But we went. We just hardly ever missed a church service of any kind. And we always went to a church we could walk to, because my father didn't go, and mother didn't have a car. But my mother was always a very religious woman. Even when she, for some reason, couldn't go to church, she was very religious. She didn't allow any foul talking in her house. She didn't allow any drinking, and she didn't allow her children to smoke. And she was just, she was a very religious woman. And she was a very good woman. She would make quilts for people that didn't have quilts, and she'd sew and make clothes for children that she found that needed clothes. Besides her own children, and she raised 8 of her own, and helped raise 2 sisters and helped raise a brother. And she had found time to help other people's children. And she was just a very good woman. But we were taught religion. And she wouldn't make us go to church. We didn't have to go to church. But if we didn't go to church on Sunday, the whole next week we weren't allowed to go anywhere but school. If we weren't able to go to church on Sunday, she felt like we weren't able to go anywhere else. So religion was very important. And for the most part, it was Baptist. Now, we did go to a Methodist church for a while. And my mother was raised in a Church of God, but after she got married, she always attended a Baptist church.
Okay. So, tell me about your parents.
Well, my mother and dad, they met, and my mother was, she was about 14. My dad would have been 21. He was 7 years older than her. And it was during the Depression. And my mother's family, her father always had a job. Even in the Depression, he always had a job. And they lived on a small farm. They always had cows for milk, and they weren't well off by any means, but they weren't desperate like my father's people. And my father's people had to scatter and go live with different families and just do work for the family just to live. And my mother had several brothers, and so my father came to live with my mother's family and take care of the farm, and all he got out of that was some place to sleep and something to eat. And that's what he did it for several years, because he had to live, and that's the only way he had to live. And so later he went to work with his brothers doing logging work. But that's how they met, and they started out just, being friends, and then they started dating, and after they dated till my mother was 21, they got married.
Okay. So how about your grandparents? Can you tell me about your grandparents?
Well, my father's father, his name was Walter Nelson. He was with a family of 7 boys, and his father was very, very mean to them, and just as soon as they got old enough to leave home, they would leave home. Well, they went in all directions, and after they got grown, none of them knew where the other went. They just went as far as they could get away with their daddy. And they found out later that one of the brothers landed in Oklahoma, and one of the brothers ended in Morgan County, and my grandfather, he ended up in Roane County. But they don't know what happened to the rest of them. They just, and the thing about it was kind of strange, was my grandfather had the same disposition towards his children as his father did. And his boys didn't leave home because of his attitude. They left because of the depression, and they just didn't have nothing to eat. They had to leave. But he was a very harsh type person, and he was very hard for the family to live with. And when he got old, kind of up in his 50s and 60s, he moved and went out to Idaho and worked a while. And he come back, he was about 65 years old when he come back to Tennessee. And he didn't live very long. He died in his sleep.
Okay, can you tell me about your other grandparents?
My mother's people, they were Stigals. And her daddy come to Loudon County. That's where my mother's family lived, or my grandmother's family. And he come to Loudon County, and they don't know where he come from. He just showed up one day, and he got to know, I don't know how he got to know my grandmother. It had something to do with the church group, but I'm not sure what. He sang and played music in the Church of God church, and she went to that church, and he was a real good musician. He had natural talent to play any stringed instrument, and any kind of a piano or organ. He could just sit down and start playing. He was just very good at it, and he had a real good singing voice. And he went from church to church singing and playing instruments. And so she met him, and they married, and they they had 8 children, I guess. But then after when he got older, and he backslid, he just got to where he just wanted to drink. And he didn't want to do church music anymore. He wanted to do music, but it wasn't church music. He didn't want anything to do with the church. I don't know what caused him to change, but he did. And my grandmother just couldn't live like he was living, so she left him. And they didn't divorce, but she died rather young. She was 52, and she died from a stroke. And my mother always felt like his behavior was what brought on her stroke, because it made her blood pressure high. And but as long as he lived, he stayed a type person that wanted to drink and party. He didn't want to be a church person anymore.
Okay. Thinking about your family many generations from now, and knowing that they may hear this recording, is there anything you want to say to them? Any wisdom or advice you would like to share?
Well, I have found that everybody's life is planned out for them. That God has a plan, and if you'll just leave it up to God, things will work out all right. And sometimes you can sit back and see how things have worked their way out. And you can just see God's hand in the way things were done. And I think if you just, do the best you can and rely on the Lord for guidance, that you'll be all right.
Okay. Share with me the story of how you and Bill met. And tell me about your wedding and your honeymoon.
Well, it's kind of funny how we met. He met this girl out lived, shared an apartment with, and they went to a movie, and they come back. We lived in an apartment. They come back to the apartment, and we talked, and so she liked him all right, but she decided to go up north. And while she was going up north, he called, and I talked to him, told him that she'd gone to visit her brother. And so he wanted to know if he could come over, and I said, well, sure. He come over, so he come over. By the time she got back from visiting her brother, me and him were dating. And so I had dated Jerry Patterson. I didn't like Jerry Patterson much. I dated him, but he was all right. He just wasn't my type person. And so he called me, and I told him that I've been dating Bill. And he said, is Norma there? And I said, yeah. So he started talking to Norma, and Norma said, he asked her to go out, and she said, well, sure, she'd go out. So she went with him, and she really liked him. And it wasn't no time till they was talking about getting married, and they got married pretty soon after that. And so I dated her husband first, and she dated my husband first. But I could never have gotten serious with Jerry Patterson. He just wasn't my type. And Bill apparently wasn't Norma's type.
Can you tell about your wedding?
Oh,
your honeymoon?
That was funny. We decided to get married one Saturday. So I asked my boss, I worked at the drugstore, and I said, can I get off this afternoon? And he said, well, why do you want off this afternoon? Because I never asked off. I said, I want to go get married. He said, oh, yeah, sure you do. And I said, I'm telling the truth. He said, well, yeah, you can be off. Of course, we were busy. So I went home, got dressed. We were going to go to Georgia and get married. Well, we went to Ringo, Georgia, and we got down there, and they told us that you had to have a blood test and a waiting period of 3 days before you could get married. But you could go to Fort Payne, Alabama, and you didn't have to wait no 3 days. You just could get married. So we drove over to Fort Payne, Alabama, and there was this judge, and his name was J. Frank Crawley, and he was in his office, and his office was a mess. There was papers everywhere and books on the wall. It was just a mess. And him and this friend was with him, and they was just laughing. They was cutting up, and you could tell they was drunk or drinking. They might have been completely drunk, but they was pretty high. And so they were talking about that the judge had hired this man to mow his yard, and he'd been out there watching him, and the man had mowed half his yard before he realized there wasn't no blade in the mower. And they were laughing about that. And so when we got through, he got the ceremony over with, and Bill asked him how much he owed him. He said, well, I used to say whatever it's worth to you. But he said, I quit saying that. He said, because one day I said that to a man, and he said, well, it ain't worth a dang to me, but she might give you something. And he said, so I quit saying that. So anyway, we paid him $20. I guess that's what it's worth to us. We didn't have a whole lot of money. And so we came back through Chattanooga. We was going to spend the night. We weren't going to have a honeymoon because Bill was going back to Illinois where he worked. He was working in Illinois, so he'd just come in for the weekend. And we started back, and we was going to stay in Chattanooga that night. And it was having some kind of convention down there, and every motel down there was full. Every time you'd go, they'd have no vacancy sign out. So we come all the way back up to Spring City. And there was a little old motel, and it was just Well, I've got a little bitty individual buildings, room, a little cabin-like things. And talk about plain. I mean, it was plain. It wasn't dirty, but it was plain. And that's the only place that had any room at all. So we stayed there. I don't remember the name of the place. It's not there anymore, of course. And we come on back to Kingston, and Bill had bought it. This was in '61, and Bill had bought a 1960 Ford, real pretty car, but it had a problem with the power steering, and it went out that day, and he had to find a piece for it to get it where he could drive it back to Illinois, and it was some kind of a defect in the car because he never could get it fixed, and it just messed up again. So he finally sold the car in just a little while. It was the newest car we'd had. Well, it was on car we had then, but it was the newest car we about ever owned until he bought that red truck. But we didn't have a honeymoon. We never have had one. We've never spent any time hardly away from home. Only time we ever stayed in a motel was when Billy was sick.
Okay. Are there any lullabies or bedtime stories that have been passed down through the family? And can you sing or tell them to me?
Well, there was that Epam and Anna story my daddy used to tell us, and it wasn't a lullaby. He would tell us after supper. We'd sit around the table, and he'd tell us stories, and that was one of the stories he told us. And he'd tell us stories about Burr Rabbit, the Uncle Remus stories. He told us those, and let's see what else. Oh, he told us Pat and Mike stories, and most of the songs that we sang, we didn't have lullaby songs. My mother sang old-timey religious songs when she'd rock the babies to sleep and things, like Old Rugged Cross and, the real old religious songs. But I don't remember the words to any of them.
How about any of the stories? Can you tell me any of the stories?
I don't remember the details of them. It's been so long since I told them. The one, Epam and Honest, was where he, how did it start? I can't remember how it started. I remember he put the dog in the water. He got cake, and I can't remember. It was let's see, what was it he got first? Can you remember?
I don't know. I can't remember. You've told me before.
I've told you several times, but I can't remember what he got first. But I can't remember the Pat and Mike stories. I remember him getting a big black bull mixed up with a railroad train, railroad engine. But I don't remember the story to it either. But he used to tell us stories real often at night after supper.
Okay. Well, how has your life been different than how you imagined it would be when you were young?
I assumed that I would live in the country and have several children and live sort of like my mother. And actually, my life's been completely different from my mother's. She never worked away from home in a job, and from the time I was 18, I worked at a job up until I quit when I was about 55. And instead of having a large family, I only had one son. And instead of living on a small farm like I assumed I would, I live on a city lot that's 50 feet by 150 feet. So I haven't lived at all like I expected I would.
Okay. So, what does religion mean to you, and what role does it play in your life today?
Well, except for my family, even including my family, I guess it's the most important thing in my life. I sort of base most everything I do on my faith in God, or faith in Jesus. About everything I do, I pray about it. And my social life is around the church. What social life I have, before Bill got sick, we had more than we do now, of course, but except for family, all my social life has to do with the church. And my friends are, almost all of them, not everyone, but almost all my friends are church family. So it has an enormous influence on, what I do and what I think.
Okay. And finally, last question. I may ask you a couple of questions that I didn't have on here, but the last question written is, if you knew this was going to be our last conversation, is there anything you've never told me that you want to share with me now?
I've told you about everything. I can't think of anything I haven't told you, Michael.
Okay.
Maybe would it be something like, of course, you're going to get the house and everything in it, like where things are in the house, maybe something like that.
I think it means like stories and stuff.
Oh, I don't know of anything that you would be interested in that I hadn't told you.
How about you, for the sake of this recording, how about you talk about your son, Billy?
Well, for 27, he lived to be 26, but for the whole time before he was born and his lifetime, he was the exact center of my life. I mean, I've always loved Bill, his daddy, but Michael, Billy, I call you Michael and him Billy part of the time, but Billy was, he just everything to me. I just, when he was sad, I was sad. He was hurt, I was hurt. He was mad, I was mad. And anybody done anything to Billy, there's a whole lot been better off had done it to me, because I just couldn't get over it. And he was very intelligent. He learned fast. He had a really good memory, and he made good grades in school. And he didn't have to study. He just, if he was there, he just picked it up. He was just good in school. He loved music. I mean, he loved music, almost all music. And
except Aerosmith, right?
Well, I wasn't too crazy about Aerosmith, but he loved, as a whole, he loved music. He wasn't crazy about, he didn't like country western, the old-timey country western, like Hank Snow and what's that one that, George Jones. Now, he didn't care for country music. I say he liked all music. He didn't care for country music. But he loved hard metal. That was his favorite. Kiss was his favorite group. And, but he liked, several of the other groups he liked. He liked AC/DC and Def Leppard, and I don't remember, several groups he really liked. And had an enormous record collection. Just stacks and stacks of records and CDs. Not CDs, but cassettes. He got some CDs later, but they come out not too long before he died. And he was in the band. He played trumpet. He enjoyed the band. He made some good friends in the band. He was not their best trumpet player because he would not do solos. He would just do the backup part. He never wanted to be a star. He just wanted to be part of it. And he loved computers. Computers was just beginning to get big when he was in college, and he loved working with computers. And that's how he made his living once he got through school, was working with computers. And he seemed like he just sort of got what he wanted. Just like when he went to school, they were just taking so many the computer class he wanted to get in, and he got in. He was the only one from his school that got in. And then he applied for this, when he went to work at the Rocky Top, he loved that job, but it didn't pay nothing. So he got to looking for a computer job, and he applied for the job at Lockwood Green, and he had just, it's the only job he applied for. He got it, and he loved the job, loved the people. And they were fixing to send him to school to learn more when he got sick. But while he was at Rocky Top, he met his wife, and she was definitely the love of his life. I mean, he dated other girls, but he come in after he dated her just a little while and told me that's going to get married. And I said, "Are you sure? Because you've just known her a little while." And he said, "When it's right, it's right." And I said, "Well, no, I can't tell you who to marry." I said, "But you've not known her very long." He said, "It don't matter." He said, "When it's right, it's right." And in just a little while, they were married. And he was the happiest I've ever seen him. He was happy. You could tell he just enjoyed life. And they loved each other. Just, you could just see it when you seen them, how much they loved each other. But, of course, they were just married a year and a half when he died. He got sick, and he went to the doctor, and they said that he'd been sick for a long time. He had a hole in his heart. Should I have been over there? Or, no, I'll go down here and get over there.
Yeah.
But he after he got sick, he didn't live very long. And Linda took him to all the doctors that they tried to send him to help him, and they did everything that they tried, everything that they could, and he just got worse and worse.
Okay.
And he died when he was, May the 20th, 1992.
Okay. And so, final question. How is your relationship with my family, seeing as Linda, my mom, remarried?
Well, I'm not very straight. Let me see.
For the sake of the recording, she's parking right now, so.
When your mother, when Billy died, we just sort of adopted Linda as ours. And she just sort of became our daughter. So when she met John and they married, he just seemed like a son almost. And John had just lost his father. He had passed away. And I think that had something to do with how much him and Bill bonded. And they just hit it off the very first time they met. The first time John came to the house was on Father's Day. And, of course, it was hard for him because his father had died not been too long. I don't remember how long it had been, but not too long. And, of course, Bill had losing Billy. And they just hit it off. They've just been close ever since Bill met him. And he don't remind me of Billy. He don't look a thing like him, and he don't act anything like him. But I've always loved him, just automatically. And it may be because I think so much of Linda that I love him because I know he loves Linda. And that made me like him to start with. But, because she was so lonely after Billy died, that I really worried about her.
Thank you for getting this interview.
You're welcome.
I really appreciate it.
Did it make sense to you?
Yes.